What's going on, guys? We're having a continued recovery from Bitcoin. Now, first off, I want to touch on something. ABTC had a massive sell-off yesterday, and we were trying to figure out what's going on. When you look at random articles, they just mention the sell-off. They don't mention the why behind it. What happened to cause the sell-off? Well, according to Eric Trump, their pre-merger private placement shares were just unlocked, meaning early investors were able to sell finally. And ABTC went from the 4s down to the 2s in one day. It is heavily oversold now on the RSI on the daily. You know, last time we saw it oversold like this, we did see a bullish divergence. That's one thing you could look for if you're looking to trade. I'll be very cautious with this if you can't tell by the chart, but you did see a bullish divergence, lower lows on the chart, and higher lows on the RSI. It did see a roughly double from there, but then after it roughly doubled from there, it did continue selling off from its bottom here of $2 down to 75 cents. It is also approaching a death cross where the red line crosses the green. I figured I'd mention what's going on here because it is a Bitcoin miner, and this was some pretty big news yesterday, and a lot of people were wondering what happened to ABTC, why the drop? Well, it seems like I said, those vested shares, those locked shares were finally unlocked, allowing early investors to finally sell, bringing selling pressure in. We'll see where it finds a floor. If it does, things seems to do nothing but go down and have reverse splits after reverse splits. I would avoid this like the plague. You could also watch to see where this levels out at. If it tries to establish a floor, you could definitely try to do a very short-term swing trade with a stop loss in place. Maybe if we get a bounce here, set a stop around 170 area, try to ride it up to the gap fill at nearly $4. That's a decent risk to reward. But I wouldn't just start accumulating or buying this hoping that it's going to recover. I would be very cautious with something like this. Now, we do have some news in Jerome Powell's last meeting. It was a blackout period. He couldn't talk about economic policy or anything like that. And we have an article here, Fed to end QT. Could this trigger a multi-year altcoin rally akin to 2019 and 2022? The Fed ending QT historically ignites multi-year altcoin rallies lasting 29 to 42 months. Historically, when the Fed is not engaged in QT or quantitative tightening, altcoins show notable strength against Bitcoin, sparking multi-year rallies and altering market dynamics. Is this why, throughout this cycle, the alts have been what we would all say very weak? Because this period of QT that we've been going through, that's finally coming to an end. Analyst Matthew Hyland identifies historical trends where non-QT periods were followed by sustained altcoin rallies lasting between 29 and 42 months. Alt saw a 42-month and 29-month uptrend while QT was not active during 2014 to 2017 and 2019 to 2022. And look at this. This line here is where QT ends. And this basically started a massive rally for alts. This is others dominance versus Bitcoin dominance, showing basically that alts gain dominance when QT ends. And again here, this is where QT ends. They've done pretty horrible. This could be where things turn around. Although this would go totally against the Bitcoin 4-year cycle, it is interesting that throughout Bitcoin's cycles, it has, in my opinion, it has heavily been impacted by what the Fed is doing. Is the Fed raising rates? Is the Fed lowering rates? Is the Fed easing or tightening? Just like from 2014 to 2017, after QT ended in 2019 of August, another altcoin rally unfolded and lasted through to 2022. These cycles suggest that Fed liquidity policy is a core influence on crypto risk assets. So is Bitcoin controlled more by a 4-year cycle based around the halvings? Is it based around a cycle because of what the Fed is doing? Or is it a mixture of both? I think it's a mixture of both. We also have this altcoin to Bitcoin pair. And when it tends to hit 0.25, it marks a bottom. QT ended, it hit 25, and alt started recovering. We're near 25 here, currently at 0.36, but you get this capitulation followed by a massive rally right when it hits that 0.25 line. And when Bitcoin dominance starts declining, capital rotates into alts. And speaking of Bitcoin dominance, let me show you what we saw last cycle, basically right towards the end. We saw Bitcoin dominance continuing to grow until it broke this trend. It found it as a resistance. And then from basically the beginning of 2021, Bitcoin dominance just continued dropping off a cliff, and alts rallied like crazy. This may be the start of this here. We had this clear trend throughout the cycle, starting from the bear market lows in 2022. Bitcoin dominance peaked at 65%. It broke this trend. It found it as resistance. Do we start coming down from here, seeing the alts outperform Bitcoin? Bitcoin can also go up, but the rate that alts could go up could be more so, meaning that Bitcoin dominance goes down, despite price of everything going higher. Another thing that's interesting is this kind of rudimentary head and shoulders. Here's the head, shoulder point, and another shoulder point. Do we see things continue down? Maybe come towards this 200 MA line. You do see that once Bitcoin broke under the 200 MA here, we saw a massive drop on dominance. Seems to have reacted there, as well as the drop here. When it didn't hold it, it kind of had a big reaction to the downside, although it did recover there. You know, is that what we need? Is that what we're going to see? We're going to see a drop to the 200 MA, bringing Bitcoin dominance to 50-something%, and then it breaks down and you see dominance continue to fall? Or is this just not the cycle for altcoins? Here's another article I'll leave down below for you guys about Powell and QT ending. You know, they did this guy dirty. Whatever filter they used just made him look like he's 20 years older at least. But this article does talk about the likelihood of rate cuts, talks about recent ISM manufacturing data that shows shrinking activity for like the 9th month in a row. I will leave that down below for you if you want a little more context on what's going on around the Fed, QT, and other details like that. Looking at the Fed probabilities, we're now at an 89% chance of a rate cut, 11% chance of leaving things current. A month ago, we were at like a 66% chance of a rate cut, 33% chance of leaving things current. Going back before that, it was more like 50-50, if not a more likelihood of seeing no rate cut. So things have shifted very quickly. Seeing this much higher probability of a rate cut than we have about a month ago, or even just a few weeks ago, could be one reason why Bitcoin's seeing a recovery, why risk on assets in general have been seeing a bit of a recovery lately. I did want to touch on Bitcoin really quick before I go. One thing I wanted to mention on Bitcoin is it does look like we're breaking out of this descending trend line that we were talking about, this descending resistance. I think it'll be important for Bitcoin to reclaim 95. It seemed to have like tapped out right there, but we need to reclaim this 95. Previous level of support kind of became a resistance there until we regained it, used it as a bouncing point, and once we failed it, you kind of saw an accelerated move down. We need to reclaim 95, then we can test our moving averages. When you see Bitcoin this oversold, it tends to be a fantastic time to add, and that's at any point in the cycle. Even look at the last cycle. You know, if you were worried that things started getting oversold and they were heading a lot lower, you know, you did have a chance to get out or trim or take some profits before things went lower. We saw the RSI bottom out here in January of 2022. Bitcoin hit 34,000 and rallied to about 50,000 before selling off more. This didn't mark an all-time bottom, but it did mark a multi-month bottom. You did see Bitcoin recover there. The only other time in the cycle, last cycle, that Bitcoin was oversold like that near tops was right around the summer of 2021. We saw things bottom out at like 30,000 and rally to a new all-time high. These tend to be great opportunities to buy. When Bitcoin is this heavily oversold, you at least can expect that in the short to mid-term, you're going to see a recovery and be able to take some profits. A year from now, could this still be Bitcoin's bottom? It's possible. It's possible we see a little recovery and then continue selling off as we enter crypto winter possibly. But these do mark great times in the short to mid-term to buy Bitcoin. And if all you care about with Bitcoin is just accumulating, these are great times to accumulate and at least get a discount from where things have been previously trading. At least not buying overbought like when Bitcoin was 120 something. If you're patient and only buy Bitcoin when it's oversold, you don't have very many opportunities to do so, but when you do, you tend to get some great deals. For example, Bitcoin was heavily overbought here at like 110,000. We saw a pretty big drop to 70,000, and we saw a very heavily oversold Bitcoin, which did give a great buying opportunity. Same with this pullback. You saw finally an oversold Bitcoin, which doesn't happen very much during the cycle, a great opportunity to add. This, in my opinion, is likely going to be a great opportunity to add. Another thing that's interesting, that death cross still at this point marked the bottom. That could always change, but so far this death cross has marked a low within a couple days of it, obviously. Same with this death cross that marked a low, this death cross that marked a low. You know, guys, take advantage of the pain. Take advantage of when Bitcoin is oversold. Take advantage of when people are unsure of what Bitcoin's going to do next in a bad way. And be careful when Bitcoin is rallying and everyone's suddenly bullish, and when people are excited, and when Bitcoin's overbought, giving you an indication that maybe it's time to take some profits at the least. But how are you guys feeling about the market? What do you think we're going to get from the Fed in a couple of days? About a week from now, we're getting the next Fed meeting. Are we going to get a cut like the market expects? Or do we get a surprise pause? Also, how have you been feeling about Bitcoin, the Bitcoin miners lately? Hopefully that story about ABTC makes you feel better about the Bitcoin miners that you do have. Thanks as always for watching, guys, and I'll see you next time.